The judge looked down at the paper in his hands for a long time. Long enough that the courtroom went completely still. Then he looked up, not at me, not at my ex-husband across the aisle, but somewhere in the middle distance, like he was trying to make sense of what he'd just read. That's the moment I think about when people ask me how it ended. Not the verdict. Not the part where my ex-husband, Joel, sat back in his chair like someone had let the air out of him. Not even the part where my daughter Zoe reached under the table and grabbed my hand without saying a word. Just that pause. That long, quiet pause before the truth caught up to everyone in the room. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I always do when I talk about this. My therapist says it's because the ending is the only part that doesn't still hurt to touch. So I go there first, like walking into a warm room before I have to go back outside. Let me start where it actually started. Or where I thought it started anyway. I was 31 years old when I stepped on the IED. I wasn't supposed to be in that part of the base. I was a logistics coordinator. Army, attached to a forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan, primarily responsible for supply chain and convoy scheduling. I was not combat. I was never combat, but the thing about war is that it doesn't read your job description before it decides what to do to you. It was a Tuesday. I remember that specifically because Tuesdays were the days I called home, and I had been thinking about that call all morning. I was 7 months pregnant. I know how that sounds, 7 months pregnant. Deployed in a war zone. But I wasn't the first and I wasn't the last, and at that point in my pregnancy my OB had cleared me for continued duty. I was healthy. The baby was healthy. And I had 18 days left before I was scheduled to rotate home. 18 days. The explosion threw me about 12 feet. I know this because there was a corporal named Whitfield who was standing behind me, and he later told me, in the flat, careful way that soldiers talk about things that almost killed them, that he counted the distance afterward because he needed something to do with his hands while he waited for the medics. I don't remember the impact. I remember the sound, which was not a boom the way people imagine it. It was more like the air being rearranged, and then I remember a ceiling. The ceiling of the medical tent. And someone saying my name, Patrice, Patrice, can you hear me? And I kept thinking, yes, I can hear you, why can't I feel my legs? Zoe was born 3 weeks later, 6 weeks early, in a military hospital in Germany, 4 pounds, 14 ounces. I was unconscious for the delivery. The first time I saw her, she was in an incubator and I was in a wheelchair, and I couldn't hold her because my right arm was in a cast, and the left one had an IV line in the crook of my elbow that the nurses didn't want me to disturb. I pressed my forehead against the glass of the incubator, and I said, "Hi, baby. I'm your mom." That's where the story should start, maybe. In that room in Germany, with my daughter behind glass and my husband Joel 3,000 miles away in Phoenix, where he had just stopped answering my calls. Joel and I had been together for 6 years before I deployed. We met when I was 24 and he was 27, at a community college night class we were both taking for different reasons. I was finishing prerequisites for a degree I never quite got around to completing, and he was taking a photography elective because, as he told me on our third date, he had read somewhere that creative hobbies made you more interesting at parties. I loved that about him. The honesty of it. Most people would have said they were passionate about photography. Joel just said he wanted to be more interesting at parties. I thought that was the funniest, most endearing thing I'd ever heard. We got married in 2014, in my mother Ruth's backyard in Tucson. It wasn't fancy. We had paper lanterns and folding chairs, and my Aunt Beverly made her 3-bean casserole that nobody likes but everyone eats because telling Beverly you don't like her casserole is not a fight worth having. Joel wore a blue suit. I wore a dress my mom and I found at a consignment shop for $62. I re-enlisted 8 months after the wedding. That was the first real crack, I think. Though I didn't see it as a crack at the time. I saw it as a choice I was allowed to make. I was good at my job. I was being considered for a promotion. The Army had paid for certifications and training that, in the civilian world, would have cost me $40,000 I didn't have. It made sense to stay. Joel said he understood. And I believe he meant it, or meant to mean it. The difference between those two things is something I spent a long time trying to map. We spent 18 months trying to get pregnant before we succeeded. The deployment orders came 6 weeks after we found out. I'll spare you the details of that particular argument, except to say that it lasted 3 days and ended not with resolution but with exhaustion, which is a different thing entirely. He kissed me goodbye at the airport. He held my face in his hands and he said, "Come home safe." I believed he meant that too. The first few weeks after Zoe was born, he called every day. I was still in Germany, still in a wheelchair, still waiting to find out whether the nerve damage in my lower back was temporary or permanent. Zoe was still in the NICU, gaining weight one careful ounce at a time. Joel called and asked how I was and how she was and said the right, mostly. And then the calls started coming every other day, then twice a week, then once. I told myself he was working. He had taken on extra shifts at the architecture firm, where he worked as a project coordinator. I knew that because the money appeared in our joint account on schedule, and it was more than usual, and I told myself that was him trying. That was him contributing in the way he knew how. When Zoe was 6 weeks old, a family readiness officer named Corporal Denise Huang, the kindest human being I have ever encountered in a government uniform, sat down next to me in the NICU family waiting room and told me, with a gentleness I will never forget, that my husband had contacted the army to inquire about the process for legal separation. I asked her if she was sure. She said she was sorry. I sat with that for a while. The waiting room had a fish tank in the corner. I stared at it. There were 3 fish, 2 orange, 1 white. I counted them several times. Then I asked Corporal Huang if she could help me figure out how to get my daughter and myself on a flight home. My mother drove 8 hours from Tucson to Phoenix when I landed. She didn't ask me anything in the car. She just drove and played the kind of quiet country music that she knows I find comforting, even though I've never admitted it out loud, and stopped at a gas station outside Flagstaff where she got me a coffee and a bag of those white cheddar popcorn. Things that I've loved since I was 12. I moved into her house with Zoe, and I started the process of learning all over again how to be a person. The spinal injury was not permanent. That was the word the neurologist used. Not permanent, which sounds like good news until you understand that it also means not immediate. It means a long time and a lot of physical therapy, and a specific kind of pain that is not sharp but constant, the way a low note on a piano can fill a room without you noticing until you step outside and realize how quiet it is. Joel had already moved out of our Phoenix apartment by the time I got back. He'd left most of my things to his credit. He took the nice coffee maker and the TV and the blue suit from our wedding, which I thought was a strange choice. He left the dress, which I kept in a box at the back of my mother's closet, for 3 years before I donated it. Divorce papers arrived 6 weeks after I landed. He had a lawyer. I did not yet have a lawyer, but my mother had a friend named Constance, who had gone through something similar, and who gave me the name of a woman in Phoenix who handled military family law. Her name was Patricia Ellison. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she talked like she had more information than she was currently sharing, which turned out to be exactly the kind of lawyer I needed. Joel's petition cited irreconcilable differences and cited my re-enlistment as evidence of incompatibility of lifestyle. He requested no custodial arrangement because, Patricia told me, he was claiming that given my military status and the nature of my injuries, he did not believe he could provide appropriate care for an infant at this time. I want to be clear about what that means. Translated from legalese into plain English, he did not want custody of our daughter because he did not want to take care of her. He was not fighting for Zoe. He was fighting to be free of us cleanly, which he was. By February, 10 months after Zoe was born, Joel Raymond was a free man, living in a condo in Scottsdale with a woman named, and I am telling you this not for drama but because it matters to the story, a woman named Mia, who he had apparently been seeing for the last 4 months of my deployment. I'm not going to tell you I was fine. I'm going to tell you that I was not fine, and that being not fine while also being a person who cannot walk and also has a 7-month-old baby is a specific kind of difficult that I would not wish on anyone. But I had my mother. I had Corporal Huang, who checked in on me with a regularity that went well beyond her official duties, and who I now count as one of my closest friends. I had Patricia, who made sure that child support was established immediately and structured in a way that would adjust upward as Joel's income increased, which she seemed to know it would. And I had Zoe, who at 7 months had discovered that she could make a sound like a small, indignant seal, and who made the sound constantly and with great enthusiasm, and who was, I want you to know, the funniest person I had ever met. I learned to walk again on a Tuesday. I remember because I called my mother from the physical therapy gym, and she cried for 5 minutes straight and then apologized for crying, and I told her that was absolutely not necessary. I walked out of that gym and I kept walking. The next 10 years are harder to summarize not because they were painful. Some of them were. Some of them weren't. But because they were full. Full in the way that years get when you stop waiting for something to happen to you and start making things happen instead. I finished my degree online, Supply Chain Management, University of Arizona, while Zoe was in preschool and kindergarten. I got a job with a logistics company in Phoenix that contracted with the federal government, which meant my military experience translated directly, which meant I started at a salary that surprised me. I bought a small house in Mesa when Zoe was 5. 3 bedrooms, one of which I turned into a home office, one of which I painted purple because Zoe said purple and I said absolutely. Joel was not present. I want to be specific about this because it matters. In the 10 years after our divorce, Joel saw Zoe a total of 11 times. I know this because I kept a calendar, not out of malice. Patricia had suggested it early on in that quiet way of hers that meant I strongly recommend you do this, so I kept it. 11 visits. The last one was when Zoe was 6 years old. He called twice after that on birthdays. The second time, Zoe answered the phone herself, and then handed it back to me after about 40 seconds and said, "I don't really know what to say to him." She was 8 years old when she said that. I didn't push. I didn't poison. I told her that her father had his own difficulties and that the choice to have a relationship with him was always hers to make at any time, in any direction. I meant it. I still mean it. That's the truth of where I stood. Child support arrived every month, at first. Then inconsistently, Patricia filed twice. Both times the arrearage was eventually paid, with interest. Joel was not a deadbeat in the legal sense. He paid what he owed, when pushed, but the money always felt like a transaction. It felt like what he had agreed to leave behind. Zoe grew up. That's the simple version. She grew up funny and sharp and deeply herself in a way that I take approximately 0 credit for, because she came out of the womb already determined to be exactly who she wanted to be. She played soccer badly and loved it anyway. She was obsessed with marine biology from age 9 through 14, and then pivoted, abruptly and without apology, to computer science. She was the kind of student who didn't get straight A's because she was trying to please anyone. She got them because she found the work genuinely interesting, which is a much harder thing to teach. When Zoe was 16, she won a regional science competition with a project on machine learning applications in ocean temperature modeling. I drove her to the ceremony in a rented car because mine was in the shop, and she spent the whole drive trying to explain the project to me in terms I would understand, and I nodded along and understood maybe 60% of it, and was so proud I had to blink a lot. When Zoe was 17, she was accepted to MIT. I'm going to let that sit there for a second, because that's what it felt like when the letter arrived. Like something that needed a second. MIT, full merit scholarship. Computer science, with a secondary focus in environmental data systems. She called me from school when she found out because she'd checked her email during lunch. I was in a meeting. I saw the text and stepped out into the hallway, and she was already crying by the time I answered. And I started crying too, and my colleague Warren knocked on the conference room window and made a face, and I held up one finger and he gave me a thumbs up and went back inside. We went out for Thai food that night. Zoe got the pad CU. She was wearing a sweatshirt she'd owned since 8th grade, and her hair was in a bun that was falling apart, and she looked like the most accomplished person I'd ever seen. I thought about that IED, about the ceiling of the medical tent, about Corporal Huang and the fish tank, and my mother driving 8 hours without asking me anything. I thought I would do it all again, every single bit of it. Joel called 2 weeks after the MIT announcement. I don't know how he found out. Zoe had a public social media presence. She'd posted about it like any 17-year-old would, so probably that. Or maybe he heard through someone who knew someone. Phoenix is smaller than it sounds. He called my number, not Zoe's. I almost didn't answer. "Patrice," he said when I picked up. "I heard about Zoe." "Yes," I said. "Might," he said. "That's incredible." "It is," I said. There was a pause. Joel was always comfortable with pauses in a way that used to attract me and later drove me insane. "I'd like to reconnect with her," he said. "I think this is a good time." I did not say what I was thinking. What I said was, "That's a conversation you'd need to have with Zoe." "Of course," he said. "Of course, I thought I'd reach out to you first, touch base." I told him I needed to go and I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a moment with my phone in my hand. Then I texted Denise Huang's. Joel called. "He wants to reconnect with Zoe now that she got into MIT. I added one emoji. Denise responded in under a minute with 3 words. "Of course he does." I didn't tell Zoe right away. I thought about it. But she was in the middle of finals and I didn't want to hand her something she'd have to put somewhere while she was already carrying a lot. I told her 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, over coffee. She'd started drinking coffee at 16, which I had opinions about and ultimately kept to myself. She listened. She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she said, "Is he serious?" "I think so," I said. She looked at her mug. "Okay," she said, "I'll think about it." She did think about it. Zoe always thinks about things the way she approached her projects, methodically, without drama, looking for the actual answer rather than the emotionally satisfying one. She spent 2 weeks thinking about it. Then she told me she was willing to have one phone call with him to see how it felt. I thought that was very mature of her. I also thought, privately, that it wasn't going to go the way Joel expected. I was right. The call lasted about 20 minutes. Afterward, Zoe came into the living room and sat on the couch with the particular stillness she gets when she's processing something. "He wants to come to my graduation," she said. "Okay," I said. He also said. She stopped. Started again. He said he has a lot of regrets. He said he wasn't in a good place when we were little and he's different now. I didn't respond to that. It wasn't mine to respond to. I told him I'd let him know about graduation, she said. She never let him know. She went quiet on the subject and I didn't push, and Joel apparently didn't follow up directly, at least not in a way she mentioned to me. 3 months later, Patricia called me at work. "Joel has filed a petition," she said. I sat down in my office chair slowly. "A petition for what?" "He's requesting formal legal recognition as Zoe's primary father and custodial guardian," Patricia said. "He's also requesting access to records pertaining to her scholarship accounts and any financial trusts in her name." The room was very quiet. "She's 17, I said. "Yes," Patricia said. "Which means he's filing before she reaches 18, when the family court would no longer have jurisdiction over these matters." I understood then. Not custody, not Zoe, the scholarship, the financial accounts, the recognition. Joel didn't want to be Zoe's father. He wanted to be on the paperwork. He wanted access to what her future was going to be worth. "Tell me what we do," I said. Patricia did not panic. Patricia never panicked. She asked me to send her every document I had. Financial records, the child support history, the original divorce decree, and she told me to start compiling a log of Joel's contact with Zoe over the years. I didn't need to compile it. I just sent her the calendar. She called me back an hour later. 11 visits, she said. "In 10 years, I said. She made a sound that was not quite a word. "The last one when she was 6? "Yes." "Okay," she said. "We're going to be fine, Patrice. I need you to hear that and believe it." I believed it. I believed it the way I believed the neurologist when he said the damage wasn't permanent, with a part of myself that knew the work wasn't over yet. There was a hearing scheduled for November, I told Zoe. She took it better than I expected, which is to say she was angry in the focused, quiet way she gets angry. Not explosive, not dramatic, more like a door being shut firmly. "He wants the scholarship money," she said. "He wants to be on the legal record as your guardian," I said carefully, "which could give him standing to." "He wants the money," she said again. She wasn't wrong. Zoe asked if she could write something. A statement, for the court. Patricia said yes, absolutely. A written statement from the minor child carries significant weight in family court. Zoe went into her room and came out 3 hours later with 4 pages, single-spaced, which she handed to Patricia at our next meeting without saying anything. Patricia read it at the table while Zoe and I drank coffee. When Patricia looked up, she took off her reading glasses and set them down carefully on her beaded chain. "Zoe," she said, "may I ask, did you write this yourself?" "Yes," Zoe said. "Every word, every word." Patricia put her glasses back on. "Good," she said. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in November. It was cold for Phoenix, barely 50 degrees. And the courthouse had the particular dry heat of a building that doesn't know what temperature it actually wants to be. Joel came in with a lawyer I didn't recognize. He looked good, I'll give him that. He'd lost some of the softness from his mid-30s, and he was wearing a suit that fit him well, and he looked like someone who'd had time to prepare for this, which he had. He didn't look at me when he sat down. He looked at Zoe. She looked back at him evenly, the way she looks at a problem she's already solved. The judge was a woman named the Honorable Louise Faber. She was small and precise, and she had the head energy of someone who had heard every version of every story, and was not interested in any performance of any emotion. "Just the facts, please, and let's move efficiently." Joel's attorney made his case. The language was careful. Reintegration of the father-child relationship, equitable recognition of parental rights, the importance of paternal involvement in a young woman's transition to adulthood. It was well prepared. It was designed to sound reasonable. Patricia cross-examined the argument point by point. She introduced the calendar. She introduced the child support records, complete but with 2 documented enforcement actions. She introduced the record of contact for the past 10 years, 11 visits, 2 phone calls, 0 school events attended, 0 medical appointments, 0. Joel's attorney said that his client had faced significant personal challenges during that period and had since undergone meaningful personal growth. Patricia asked, on the record, whether counsel could specify which challenges had prevented his client from attending a single school event in 10 years, or from calling his daughter more than twice between the ages of 6 and 16. There was an objection. It was sustained. Patricia moved on. Then the judge asked to read Zoe's statement. The courtroom got very quiet. Judge Faber read the whole thing. It took about 8 minutes. I know because I was counting, because I needed something to do with my hands. Zoe sat next to me and was completely still, the way she gets. Joel's attorney shuffled some papers. Joel himself sat very still with his hands flat on the table. When Judge Faber finished, she looked up. Not at me, not at Joel, somewhere in the middle, that long pause. Then she set the pages down and looked at Joel directly. Mr. Raymond, she said, your daughter has written, and I quote, that she did not have a father growing up. She had a legal obligation that was met inconsistently. She states that she does not object to you being a part of her life going forward, on her terms, if you choose to work toward that. She also states, clearly and without ambiguity, that she does not believe any court should give you legal standing over financial decisions related to her future, as you were not present for the decade of effort that created that future. The room was still. I have read a great many statements from minors in family court, Judge Faber said. This one is among the most clearly reasoned I've encountered. Joel said nothing. His attorney said nothing. Patricia said quietly, Your Honor, we move that the petition be denied in its entirety. Judge Faber said, So moved. That was it. That was the whole thing. Joel sat back in his chair, slowly, like someone had let the air out, and I felt Zoe's hand close around mine under the table. We went to lunch afterward. Me, Zoe, Patricia, and Denise, who had taken a personal day to be there. We went to a place Zoe liked that had good sandwiches and a patio, and the day had warmed up enough to sit outside, and we ordered too much food and ate almost all of it. Denise talked about her kids. Patricia talked about a documentary she'd watched about Antarctica. Zoe ate half a turkey club and then stole the other half of mine and showed no remorse whatsoever. At some point Denise said, How do you feel? Zoe thought about it. Lighter, she said. That was the right word. Lighter. Joel called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 23 seconds long. He said he understood, he wasn't going to contest the ruling, and he hoped that someday Zoe might be open to getting to know him. I played it once. I didn't save it. Zoe started at MIT the following August. I drove her to the airport with 3 checked bags and a carry-on that was definitely over the size limit, but the gate agent let it go. We stood at the security checkpoint for a long time, longer than we needed to, because that's the kind of thing you do when you're not ready to stop standing there. You're going to be incredible, I told her. I know, she said, which is exactly what I would have said, and which made me laugh. She went through the checkpoint. She turned back once at the conveyor belt and waved. I drove home alone. I cried about 20 minutes in, somewhere on the 202, and then I stopped. Because the thing about tears is that they run out eventually, and then you're just a person on a highway in the afternoon sun, with an empty back seat, and a life that is, in the final accounting, yours. I thought about the ceiling of the medical tent. I thought about the fish tank. I thought about my mother driving through the dark without asking me anything. I thought about an 11-year-old calendar in a drawer in my office, 11 check marks in 10 years, and a 4-page statement written by my daughter in 3 hours on a Sunday night. I merged onto the freeway. The sun was coming in low through the passenger window the way it does in November in Phoenix, that particular amber that makes everything look a little bit holy. I turned on the radio. A song came on I didn't know. I left it on anyway. That's the thing about surviving something. It doesn't end with a verdict. It doesn't end with a drive home. It just keeps going, and you keep going with it, and eventually you realize the surviving has quietly become living without you noticing when the switch happened. I didn't notice. I was too busy driving.